Hello, and welcome back to the Cinematography Salon Podcast, where our mission is simply celebrating cinematography. I'm David Kruta, founder of Cinematography Salon and producer of the show, and we are kicking things off with something extra special. Recently, we traveled to Poland for Camerimage, where we spent a week surrounded by filmmakers, DPs, and friends new and old. And while we were there, we recorded something unforgettable, a series of conversations and deep dives into what makes cinematography truly magical. Our fantastic hosts, Ava Benjamin Shorr and Lauren Guiteras, led the discussions with their insight, curiosity, and passion for the art, working alongside Topher Hammond, who co-produced and ran cameras to make sure every interview looked and sounded top-notch. A massive thank you to the team at Fujifilm, who made these episodes possible and our trip unforgettable. Their continued involvement and support of this community is deeply appreciated, and we look forward to collaborating well into the future. We'll be releasing these special episodes alongside Season 3 of the podcast coming very soon, so stay tuned. If you love this craft as much as we do, you're in the right place. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome to a special edition of the Cinematography Salon Podcast. For the next several episodes, we will be recording in Torun, Poland, during the 32nd Annual Camerimage Film Festival. My name is Ava Benjamin Shorr, and today I am joined by my very special Camerimage co-host, Lauren Guiteras. For today's episode, we would like to welcome Lol Crowley, the renowned cinematographer of such films as Noah Baumbach's White Noise, Bradley Corbet's Vox Lux and Childhood of a Leader, Andrew Hay's 45 Years, and Ballast, directed by Lance Hammer. This year, Lol entered the main competition of Camerimage with Corbet's latest film, The Brutalist. It's a historical epic about the fictional architect Laszlo Toth. We just got out of a screening of it this afternoon and can't wait to dive in. Welcome to the show, Lol.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to get started on kind of a juicy question, and hopefully it's not too complicated to get into. I just found there were so many striking choices in this film. And in my opinion, one of the things that I think off the bat you and Bradley Corbet do really well is, I think, play with the use of perspective in the camera's eye. And I find that with every film that you guys do together, there seems to be framing that is just really dense with information and emotion. For example, in The Brutalist, you photograph notable symbols like the Statue of Liberty and the cross, but skew their framing in unexpected ways that merge both intellectual analysis and the main character's perspective. Other examples of perspective shifts amongst the characters often happen in your oneers. And another interesting choice is how the camera transports the audience almost in a first-person POV through expansive landscapes via car or train. Would you be open to discuss how the two of you discussed how you would use the camera in The Brutalist?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's my third film with Brady, Childhood of a Leader, Vox Lux, and Brutalist. There are themes that all three films sort of share to a certain extent, you know, the idea of a sort of a cultural figure or some sort of an icon in a way that is fictionalized, you know. But then it's also like Brady's very interested in the idea of sort of antiquity versus modernity, and sometimes posing the question, are we really progressing? You know, like there's a big rant that Celeste has in Vox Lux where she's talking about the quality of like TVs in Costco being like 8K this that, and then it's like and then interestingly in this movie with the Carrara marble quarries and things like that, it's where the marble was mined for David and Statue of David and the Pietà and things, and now people are going there buying their work surfaces and things like that, so at the risk of digressing, I only say that because it's like, because there's a sort of commonality between the films to some extent, there's also a kind of language that is shared often between the films as well. So for example, the opening sequence of The Brutalist credit sequence is on a like a Greyhound bus almost, that Laszlo Toth takes from New York to Philadelphia, and it's a very sort of like it's a very charged way of moving the camera, full of momentum and sort of expectation, And Brady is a wonderful for a collaborator, a wonderful balance, because he's even from the very first movie that he directed, he has a very, very assured vision, and he has a very ambitious vision, and it's also not like an affectation. Like it's always in support of the story, you know? And so often he will come to me with these very strong ideas. Sometimes we will expand upon them or, you know, deviate towards something I might come up with. Most of the time, it's a process of sort of executing his wanners or his ideas, you know, as best as possible, you know. So it doesn't always happen like that, but there are some moments in like the way, you know, for example, racing down the road on these low camera angles, and you know, and I was like, oh, well, you know, we could use like an 8mm rectilinear lens. And he was like, oh, what's that? You know, and this was like on Vox Lux, and it's a lens that doesn't distort as much as a wide angle lens would, you know. So it's a constant process of like, and then he might see that and be like, oh yeah. And I think maybe he'd never even thought about going, okay, we used an 8R, a Zeiss 8R, I think it was, and he'd never thought of using an 8mm lens. So, you know, it's kind of a process a lot of the time. But he has these very strong ideas, just pulling me back to your initial question. He has these, very strong ideas, that very strong visual motifs and ideas that I feel absolutely support the story, you know. With this film, it's a mixture of Steadicam and handheld as well as traditional sort of dolly moves and things like that. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, because it seems like he is, you know, like taking the language and kind of like imbuing it with the character's perspective, but the character's arc seems to also play into his themes. It kind of goes, everything kind of is hand in hand a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's right. It's important that, you know, everything comes together, not just the cinematography, but everything comes together in support of the story. Sometimes I can watch a film and be aware that the photography is somehow doing its own slightly different, slightly out of step, like it's a little too pleased with itself somehow, or a little too, like I'm not super, I mean, I light a lot, but I'm not, I think there are maybe some schools of cinematography that are a little bit more impositional. So, and what I mean by that is like, I mean, Christopher Doyle, who I always have a lot of time for, the first time I came to Camerimage, I hadn't shot a film, and I met Chris Doyle, and my mind was blown. And I was very, very, very intrigued by what he had to say, very intelligent things that he came out with. Anyway, he said, in the West, you say, here's a frame, how do I fill it? And he says, in Asian cinema, you say, here's the world, how do I frame it? And I was like, ooh, that second one's good. And that's just kind of, so I don't like to be too impositional. I like to go to a space with the designer or the director or the location manager, whoever decides upon the space. And then when we're pretty sure we've locked, I like to be there on my own. And I like restrictions. I prefer real locations to sets. I don't like to be able to say to someone, oh, move this wall, do that. I like, okay, I can't move this wall. How do I tell this story? Or I'll sit and watch the light for several hours and I'm like, how do I not screw this up? Like, how do I maintain what everybody liked about it and why we're here? You know, so there's a sense of naturalism about that. But then when I light, the lighting is informed by what we initially responded to, or, you know, so I'm almost kind of like trying to recreate the accidental or recreate the found in a way, you know?
Absolutely.
Rather than, you know, and to that end, I tend to use kind of softer light a lot of the time and things like that. And I just try to be sort of respectful to the space and light it in a way that isn't too prescriptive to the movement of the actors. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, you know, as we see in the film, architects are always designing with light in mind, very much in the same way that production designers and cinematographers work together with space and light. And we were both curious about how you talked about that process, both with Brady as well as with Judy, the production designer.
Of course, yeah. Well, I mean, as Judy has spoken about, the movie was shot for like 33 days for like under $10 million, right? So there was never a conversation about the Institute being built, you know, as like physical. I mean, it's a huge, partially subterranean concrete structure, And so it was about reappropriating spaces and then Judy designing within them, or, a certain amount of VFX work, like we actually see it on the Institute in partial build or full, almost complete build, on the things like that. So it was an amalgamation of different places and different areas and things like that. So to that end, to your question, we really then had to kind of like, there was one location I can think of, which is this kind of concrete silo that existed in Budapest. I never really fully found out what it was designed for, but anyway, it was some gas or liquid containment thing. Anyway, and it had windows in it, at some point they had installed these windows, and it had these steps down. So it's this cylindrical silo with a door in, and it's where Laszlo ends up it becomes part of the Institute, and it's where Laszlo installs the altarpiece, mm-hmm. and then the light comes down and things like this. So light was very, very important in Laszlo's design and Judy's design, which are both the same thing. It's like she was inhabiting Laszlo in order to design the building, which is kind of fascinating in itself. So, you go into that space, like that silo, for example, and then it changes depending on the time of day. And then also there's, windows all the way around. So then you're trying to remove light where more than anything, you're trying to put some shape into it. So like maybe the windows you don't see, we cover over and we black those out. And then Brady was like, a kind of integral essence to the film is this idea, this design that's purely about architecture and light, where Laszlo builds this cross in the top of the building, and the light throughout the day moves across, and then it at a certain point in the middle of the day at noon, I think, depending on time of year, I guess, it hits the altarpiece, right? And so Brady was like, well, I really want to have this this cross of light on the altarpiece. Really difficult to achieve.
That was my next question. Yeah.
Really hard to achieve because, it has to be a very, very sharp shadow, so in that case, you either have to put the gobo, or whatever's creating that shadow very close to the source. But the shot is you're here and you go in and then you look up and you see, it's after Van Buren's suggestion is they found his body or found something amiss, right? And then you cut. And what's clever about it is you then cut to going into the silo and you see a cross, which of course is, in Christianity would signify death of Christ. So you're like, okay, so is that illusion. And then you tilt up and then it's an inverted cross, so it's this kind of slightly suggestive of a kind of darker symbolism, if you will, And then for that one, because you're going in and you're looking up and and then you see the cross, there's no way that cross could, the audience might perceive it that way, but it would be very difficult to create such a. So my gaffer Attila Dodzi, basically in the bit you don't see when you go into the silo, just behind us, we ended up using these like moving lights with very, very strong shutters in them. So they're basically like very, very hard lights, and we had one to create the. One part of the cross, and then they overlapped like that. So it was
separate
really
sources.
Sources. And of course, if they were to move it anyway, it would all start to kind of like, you would, because it's so essentially a very magnified light source in a way. So you would it's very successful at the end of the movie. And then with Mate Turniek's grading as well, we could clean it up and bloom them slightly and stuff. Yeah, so that was a good example I can think of where light absolutely was an essential part of not only the film, but of, the crossover between design and cinematography.
Yeah, I want to kind of elaborate on this question of like, you mentioned like Statue of Liberty, the cross, at that point you're kind of getting into like semiotics almost more than you're getting into photography.
Yeah,
and I'm so curious about your approach to photographing these things that are already charged with meaning, that have been photographed a million times, and what your process was like with Brady about finding a way to photograph them that still felt specific and new and wasn't, held down by all these millions of times the symbols have been shown before.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think Brady has spoken about the idea of maximalism and minimalism within the film. I kind of feel like within the maximalist and the minimalist, there's a taste, or Brady and I share, we share an aesthetic, I suppose, or a kind of sensibility, whatever you call it, whatever that thing is. I don't like to poke at too much, but whatever that thing is of how one responds or likes, transcends both the large and the small. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not like we go maximalist and then it's like, okay, get the big lights out, let's do this. It's almost like, I feel like there's a same sensibility, whether it's a huge image or a huge, like literally a vista, like in the marble quarries, or whether we're kind of like as close as we are now. You know, I feel like there's something that connects it. They don't feel like these disparate things. I'm also aware that I'm completely not answering your question at the moment, but I will answer your question. No, I suppose what I was going to say was that, you know, when the idea had always been that you have this handheld sequence that starts in the bowels of the ship with Laszlo coming to America, and you're disorientated, and the audience is disorientated, and it slowly unveils itself and evolves. So it's handheld, we follow him. Then by the end of it, as we ascend the staircase in the ship, we're sort of spat out into this overexposed world, and it's kind of a little heady, and they sort of spot this thing, and that motivates the camera to swing off, and then we cut to a sort of tumbling reveal of the Statue of Liberty, you know. It's very much like it's not literal, like it's definitely a kind of impression of how that feels emotionally. I think one of the starting points was, I said to Brady, wouldn't it be great if we could be right there and we're so in it that you don't know what it is? Like you're in the folds of the metal, and you're sort of twisting, and you're like, what? It's almost kind of like this, you're in the robes, and then you kind of pivot round, and then you look, and you see a face and a thing, and then it unveils itself, you know. So we went down that road for a little while, and then it either wasn't appropriate, or it's kind of an evolution out of it being very difficult to achieve, because you can't get physically close to the statue. So if you were actually just to film it, if you're on a boat and you film it, you're like, oh, like it's good, but I imagine people sometimes like, oh, I thought it was bigger than that, or whatever, you know. Like, and plus it's on the plinth and it's on the island, and you can't get close to it. So the literal version would be that. Our version is that it's the impression of the new world, but the new world is like, you know, untethered itself and is tumbling, and, you know, the interpretation of that can be, there can be a number of interpretations of that, you know. But I think it's interesting because you come to the Statue of Liberty, and it should be fixed and inanimate and solid and representative of this, and then it's not. It's this untethered, tumbling thing. So it's like it represents America, but also the disorientation and an unsettling quality. And yeah, I mean that's my take on it.
I feel like you guys did a really good job of capturing disorientation.
Right.
Like, you know, it's kind of funny. Like, I don't know if anyone's asked you about this shot, and it's only when you're speaking about the rest of the film that I really remembered how much I picked it out when I saw it. I was like, that was interesting. You know, it was when Laszlo was dreaming, I think, about his niece. And she's standing on sort of and there's sort of, it looks like maybe a Steadicam shot, but there's sort of these stuttery zoom-ins. Right. I was like, what is going on there? But it was so, I was like, that is a good, however you express a dream, that felt like a really interesting way to do it, you know?
Interesting. Yeah. No, it's, kind of a faltering quality to it, you know?
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, actually, the some of that was shot very early on, and I didn't actually shoot that Venice sequence. I shot all the other, but that first introduction on the boat was shot in a very specific time, and I think it was like during COVID, so I couldn't, like, it was the very earliest things, like many years ago now, that Brady shot on a boat, and they went out. So I was obviously, you know, in communication with them about it, you know, but it was like, but in terms of the mechanics of how that zoom or you know went, who knows? But it's that was
Yeah, I mean, another one was the when Laszlo and his wife are having sex and they're both on opium.
Yes.
Yeah, all these like little techniques that
that was like that was something that it was inspired by John Matheson's work in Love is the Devil, which was a John Maybury film from like the late 90s with Derek Jacobi playing Francis Bacon. It's a wonderful film. I think it still stands up. It's terrific. Like a BFI film, not a huge budget, but like really inventive photography. They weren't allowed to shoot the Francis Bacon paintings. So what they did was, like when you sometimes see, like it could either be the cardinals with with a slight sort of streaking or slightly grotesque, horrific quality, or stretched limbs with like slightly like the smearing of the almost like defleshed bodies.
Yes. So
what they did was, and what we did, we worked with a guy called Lester Dunton. So Joe Dunton lives in Wilmington, and he was closely associated with Kubrick and working with like the NASA lenses, and basically working. He's an amazing sort of lens builder and camera technician and collector and DP in his own right. So basically, Lester took a 435 camera that he has and then put it in maintenance mode. So basically, instead of, obviously traditionally when you expose a frame, it gets pulled through, static, shutter opens, then shutter closes, and then the next frame is pulled through 24 times a second. When it's in maintenance mode, the film gets pulled through as the shutters open. So it has this kind of streaking quality to the highlights, And so we were kind of fascinated by that. And Brady, I showed Brady some examples, and he just felt that it was perfect for kind of this, almost like a sort of an ethereal sort of transcendental kind of moment of opiate charged lovemaking scene. And then he goes to the window as well, and then he closes the shutters and it just stops because it's like, so then half the frame has it and half the frame doesn't and stuff. It's really wild. It's a kind of tricky technology, and it's you need a few goes at it to get it right, because camera's not designed to work that way. But yeah, that was the thinking behind that one.
Yeah, and I love how you sort of tease it in other parts of the movie too. It kind of sneaks in,
it's in the jazz scene when he's high, and he's watching the saxophonist. There's like a streak of the saxophone, I think, that kind of, or a light that, I think it's like there's a light that creates this kind of spear of shaft of light through the frame.
So that makes me wonder, like, is that something that you approached in camera testing, or were there other things that you did in camera testing that informed the style?
We do a lot of testing of stocks. Even if we end up, like in this case, we ended up quite close to where we'd worked before in terms of like, we really love the Cooke S4 lenses. We just like, and we were always like, oh, let's test these lenses. Then we're in the test, and then we're like, oh, God, what's that slate again? Like, oh, it's S4s. And we're like, so we're like, we're very, very happy to use them, but then we're a bit like, oh, we keep doing the same thing. The films do look very different, but for different reasons. But it's, we end up kind of, our workhorses like the 250 daylight, Kodak stock, the 500, and the S4s. And I've used that combination on other movies as well, and it's just we did a lot of testing, but then we also had the VistaVision. So we did testing with the VistaVision that was shot with Leica R lenses. That came out of Film Revolution, Camera Revolution in London, and we prepped them at Movie Tech. So there was a lot of prep for that because if you're renting a camera and there's an issue with it, you can kind of make a phone call and get another one out. If you're on VistaVision, which are kind of like rare as hen's teeth, as the British expression goes, then it's tricky. We had a couple of really amazing VistaVision ACs and technicians that worked on the camera, the same ones that Robbie Ryan used on Poor Things, so they were great. Did I deviate from the question?
No.
Okay.
No, I think you answered it. Yeah.
I'm curious, something I've noticed with your work across multiple films now is like the way that you play with like underexposure in the black level.
Sure do.
It's
I get myself in a lot of trouble.
And I think that it's so interesting, like the way that people shoot film, like there's so many different philosophies on it. And I feel like there's kind of the like post-Harris-Savides school of like people that like to underexpose, like Chris Blauvelt and Sam Levy, and I'd maybe throw you in there, and
I'm happy to be thrown in there.
And I guess I'm curious to know, like in the Brutalist, I just loved like the way that it felt like there was a really nice black level. But it also just felt like there was a lot of tonality in the shadows, like in the toe of the film. And I was like,
right.
And, it's like, I know like this has to do with a little bit with lighting. Like you will have like, I noticed like sources like coming through a window, bouncing off a wall, and that's the key light or something like that. So then you're maybe metering something kind of low.
Yeah.
But, I guess it's more of like, I'm just curious to know, like, it's almost maybe more of like talking about the approach and working with that end of the curve that, maybe doesn't get a lot of love and is maybe you can fuck it up a little bit easier. Like, I'd just be curious to know like your philosophy and maybe good techniques that you feel like help you work well in that space.
There's a lot to be said about that. I mean, just because there's lots of reasons for doing it and there's lots of technical know-how of how to do it,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So like break it down a little bit. It's basically Gordon Willis and Harris. I mean, first movie I ever shot was a movie called Ballast, and it sort of set me on my way, and there was a lot of like low light photography. In fact, I wasn't really very good at lighting then, and every time I lit a scene, it really wasn't as good as not lighting a scene. And I'd sort of come from a world of like available, like I say, come from a world, like I'd shot short films that Lance Hammer had seen, and he loved the fact that it was non-actors, low light photography, 35mm, non-actors, available light, real locations, blah, blah, blah. It was very much like Breaking the Waves or like, it was a whole era of kind of, like Dardenne Brothers movies, things like that, that were just very, like, had a foot firmly in the documentarian camp as well as the other one, So anyway, Harris got in touch after that movie, and he was like, I couldn't believe that I got an email from Harris saying how much he loved the film. I was like, wow. That's it, done now. I can move on to, what else shall I do? Archaeology, great, I'll just great, tick that one, that's me done. So I've always kind of been very bold with exposure, and I've had directors that have encouraged me to do that. And the first thing I'd say is that you need an invitation from your collaborators to do that. There's no benefit it's a very risky thing to do, and it can be an expensive thing to get wrong. And it's also, you don't really want to just get berated by somebody because you get the film back and they're like, yeah, I think we might have to reshoot it. Like you've got to make the decision. If our exposure is on the edge, we might fall in, and if we fall in, we'll deal with it. So you need that collaboration, that invitation, and not to have it to be like a hysterical kind of like reaction to if you're doing that. And I think like that's where the good stuff is, right? On that. Right at the edge there, it's good. That's where the interesting stuff is. Like the way Harris was dealing with the stock on Birth. Absolutely extraordinary looking film, like amazing. Anyway, so basically, I had a history of exposing like that, and then which Brady obviously responded to, and then with Childhood of a Leader, Vox Lux, and Brutalist, they all share that a certain because they're all period, even though Vox Lux doesn't feel like period to me, being 50 years old, but it's technically period. So basically, because they're all period, our philosophy was, with modern film stocks being as they are, and with there being often a celebration about photography, cinematography owing a debt to photography, often there's this kind of lot of conversation about dense blacks and things like this. And whereas I kind of think, certainly with these three films, it's more interesting to talk about how a painter would build up shadow levels, and they would be looking at purples and browns and blues, and there would be colors in the blacks, and they wouldn't be, it'd be rare that you would paint with just a pure black, and
or you have the underlayer of the canvas,
build it up that way, and like a Rembrandt or something like this. And so basically, what we started to do was really just kind of distress and torture the film by underexposing it and push processing it, like a stop or two stops. On Ballast, I was push processing 2 stops. I've since come to the conclusion, since working with Photochem, that it kind of bottoms out after a stop and a half. You don't really get a lot more out of it. So I tend to now go around about a stop and a half, something like that. And so in a way, you're almost pushing the negative down one and then pulling it up. You're trying to, like, if you just shot it flat, like the correct exposure, I feel it wouldn't necessarily, there's a modernity to stocks that wouldn't lend itself, in our opinion, to that. Like, we're trying to drag the grain up, and then we'll sort of like, push processing, you end up with more contrast, so then we'll kind of like lift the blacks. And I try to get away from this like digital black level as well that we've got used to. So I tend to establish where we sit the blacks. And Mate Terniek the colorist would attest to that as well. Sometimes I'm like, I lose myself in the grain. I'm like, I have to recalibrate where the black level is. He's like, no, this is where we are. We're like -10 or whatever that percentage is, and that's what we decide on, so that was kind of the philosophy. And then this idea of like, there was an early school of photography called pictorialism that was much more about trying to elevate photography to an art form before it, this is early 20th century, right? So basically, they'd only ever known sort of painting in terms of direct representation. So they were like, well, it's not really an art form, it just captures what's there, And so the pictorialists were like, okay, how do we elevate this? So they would sort of mess with focus and painting and printing and stuff and have a much more sort of painterly, impressionistic quality. And I was like, that's what it is. That's what I write, Yeah. And Sally Mann is the same. I love Sally Mann's work. I also really love precise photography like Stephen Shorr, Joel Sternfeld. But I'm more like Todd Hido is that for me as well, where I'm just like, that's what I like about Todd Hido. I like the fact that it feels caught and it feels like I like the idea of the accidental. I like the idea of not being fully in control, but professionally in control enough of my expertise and emotions to sort of make the movie. But then you're like, the thing is with digital photography, you're on set, and then I've always found that I've made my boldest choices shooting on film, right? And it's kind of counterintuitive because you think, okay, if I'm shooting digital, I see it and I can see how far I can go and I can go further. It doesn't work that way. It's like I end up, on film, I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. And then the lab will go like, this is pretty thin. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, there's not really a great deal on the net. And I'm like, So then I was asleep this night and then I look at it and then somehow in the context of the movie, it all works. And the other thing I would say about that, and I said it earlier, but is that audiences are really interesting. They are very generous because they assume that you have complete control and everything is intended. So if, so you make a choice, like Wim Wenders has I think he maybe famously said, and forgive me if I mess this up, but it was something like he wasn't fully happy with the red in Paris, Texas, right? And you're like, what? The red in Paris, Texas?
Crazy.
That's the red we're all trying to get, And so it's no longer yours as a filmmaker, it's like it's passed over to the audience, and music is the same, And so it's really interesting. Like, in many ways, an audience really helps you out because they're like, oh, it was so bold what you did with it. Yeah, when I thought my career was ruined because I underexposed that thing, or you know what I mean? So I think it's really interesting, and I like the idea of the accidental and not, and the very nature of filming on film means you're not in control. When that film is going through the bath, you might have a very good idea based on how many years you've been doing it, your experience. But when you get back, you're like, that's pretty nice. I didn't know that was going to come out that way, and it's so.
Yeah, and same to your point about shooting on location versus in a studio. On location, amazing things happen. A bird flies by at the right moment. Things like that that don't happen in the more petri dish environment. Yeah.
No, exactly. And I do. I mean, sometimes I'm, I'll have discussions, about colors of walls or something. I can hold my own, but I'm not it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if someone went, this is the color of the walls. I'm like, great, okay. It doesn't mean I don't care. I just don't trust my opinion when I have 12 shades of violet. And then I'm like, I'm like, I have no idea. I mean, I'm so used to that thing of coming from a world of it's somebody's council house and they've given it up for us to film a scene in, and we're shooting anamorphic, and that room's tiny, and then you're like, okay, and I'll figure it out, you know. And I'm definitely informed by that, as opposed to a blank canvas and then like, okay. And I'm amazed by, you know, and I guess I've had versions of this all the way along, but I'm amazed by filmmakers and cinematographers who prefer to start in that way, you know, like whether it's Hitchcock or something, where they're like, everything, you feel like you have complete control, and you don't want the accidental. You don't want the, you know, you want to just have complete control over everything, you know. Yeah. But I think you have to be incredibly, you know, because having that complete control limits everything to, do you know what I mean? It kind of tops out on your nothing. You know,
it puts a false ceiling on what the movie can
on
be.
it, and if something magical happens, you shut it down. You don't go, oh, let's go to the magical thing, you know. So I'm always kind of really intrigued by other, but it's just not me. I know I'm not that person. I know I'm more of the second version that Chris Doyle spoke about. I'm more the, you know, I'm more the, here's the world, how do I frame it? You know?
Yeah.
It's just what I'm switched on to, I guess.
We hope you're enjoying the episode, and now for a quick word from our sponsors. We'd like to extend our gratitude to Fujifilm for their continued support of this podcast and for helping us take the show all the way to Poland. Be sure to check out GFX 102, which is the latest camera in an incredible 90-year legacy. GFX 102 is an exceptional cinema tool for solo operators, commercial creatives, and dedicated cinematographers. Search the Fujifilm USA store or visit a local dealer to find out more. Next, we have CreamSource, an industry pioneer since 2005, designing and building innovative lighting solutions that power productions worldwide. By partnering with some of the best cinematographers, gaffers, and rental companies in the industry, CreamSource leverages expert feedback to provide purpose-built lighting products that address complicated production challenges head-on. A big thank you to SanDisk for their continued support of the show. Their lineup of extreme portable solid-state drives have become a staple on film sets and a personal favorite of mine for how durable, reliable, and fast they are. We also use the SanDisk Professional G Drive Enterprise-class hard drives to store and transport these special episodes all the way from Poland. SanDisk leads in drive and memory card technology, emphasizing not just storage, but everything worth keeping. Lastly, thank you to Condor Blue for the cages for our cameras that we use to record this show. Condor Blue was created to not only design high-quality production accessories with the filmmaker in mind, but also to stand behind these products with a lifetime warranty, exceptional customer service, and fair pricing. Thank you to all the sponsors for all their continued support, and now back to the rest of the episode.
Talking about color a little bit, that kind of ties into another thing I wanted to ask you about, and it's looped into the exposure question too. I think, you know, something that, okay, this could be just like pure taste and aesthetics, but I find that in that school of underexposure, oftentimes, okay, is this taste or is this part of the technical choice? But I found there's kind of a brownness that kind of, or a greenness that kind of takes over the image, you know? And like when I think about Birth, there is kind of a brown, a green, you know.
The snow in Central Park looks like a Bruegel painting. I mean, it's like, oh my God, you created a Bruegel painting.
Yes.
Stunning, you know.
Right, and I've always thought, yeah, I agree. I love that look. But with the Brutalist, I thought, you know, what was so interesting is there were like the delicacy and the feathery quality of light in the toe, but then there was also these really rich colors, you know, like I just kept thinking about like the like cardinal reds and like burgundy and the earth tones. Everything was it wasn't like, I didn't feel like you guys just went into the grade and saturated everything, but it felt like, I was like, this is kind of not what I'm used to in seeing Underexposure, you know?
Yeah, okay,
like,
interesting, yeah.
Were you guys counteracting the...
No, I mean, Mate might be sat here and tell me I'm, you know, you might have a complete contradictory argument. But, I mean, we didn't overly... I remember one thing that we did, and we always try to do, is try not to... Well, there's three things. We don't go into the DI and create the look. Like, you know, we all work together through prep and everything, colorist involved, to hone the look and get there. But it's not like we shoot it and then go, okay, how's the movie going to look? You know, like, you know, I'm sure most people don't do that either. It would be kind of send you in a bit of a tailspin. But my point is that we also didn't overwork the DI. You know, it wasn't like, oh, the camel coat, key into the camel coat, and you know, and then, you know, which you might actually, if you were trying to do like a Stephen Shorr or an Eggleston homage, because there's so much pastel in their images, and then you have one pop of color or something. Like if you weren't shooting Ektachrome or something, you might have to do that to manipulate it. Do you know what I mean? But we didn't overly work it in that way. I mean, there's this one scene, I do know exactly what you mean, and there's this one scene where where Laszlo's shoveling coal, and we cut out to a wide, and there's what looks like a painted backdrop of a cement works in the background, which it's not. Coal looks like a moonscape. It's like this weird, like something to do with like the negative fill or something that might be adding to it. And then there's like this Edward Hopper-esque kind of quality of light coming out, which I can't take credit for because it was just the day. So I only reference Edward Hopper because that's how it makes me feel, not being self-congratulatory. But but then there's kind of like, and then there's Guy Pearce's character here, Isaac de Boncolet here, and then atop the coal is Adrian, and it's stunning. And we got it back, and I was like, oh, wow, I don't know, I'll never be able to recreate that again. Like, it was such an alchemy. It wasn't like, yeah, that's what I intended. It was like, it wasn't what I didn't not intend it, but it was like, whew, I was like, I was like, what the hell? Like, what on earth has happened there? Like, really strange. Like, it was beautiful, but I'm like, if someone went, yeah, could you do that? And I'd be like, no. Like, I just don't, like, I know the technical, I know I didn't screw it up, but I don't know what magic happened in that moment to just be like, Jesus, that's stunning. Like, very, like, weird, dreamlike quality to the whole image. It's insane. But to your point, I don't like to sort of crush the blacks. I don't like to kind of like, I'm very conscious, like, if people have clothing, I want to see the edge of the lapel, and I want to see it. I don't like it when it all just falls into a mush, like one. So I do tend to then sort of elevate it and lift it up. Even if the information isn't even there, I'll try and make it feel like it is. I don't like really deep, solid patches of black, So I tend to be a little elevated with and then obviously the push processing does that anyway, and lends itself to this whole idea of like dragging color up from the print, from the dye layers on the film and stuff like that. So I feel like I've done it so many times now, versions of it, that I really just know my way around it. And I spot meter more than I incident read. And, so if I'm in that low light, I'm really kind of like, what, really it's about, okay. And then sometimes it's like, just where it's like, go home, oh, there's something. Oh, there's a slight reading. Okay, we're good. Like I really go bold with it. Yeah. Another one was, which I think is very, very successful, but it wouldn't have been an obvious way to go necessarily, was when Emma Laird's character suggests that Laszlo has made inappropriate advances. And he comes down and tells him to leave, and it's that scene where he wakes her up in bed. And then, so we're on Adrian, and then when you come back to Alessandro, he's just in shadow, like, and he's just, you never see his face. It's kind of this ominous thing. And Brady was quite, I don't want to see I just want him to be in darkness in this thing, which is unusual because you wouldn't normally, it's not like we played it safe and then sat it down in the grade. It was like, that's how we exposed it. But it feels perfect for the scene, and it felt the correct thing to do at the time, but seeing it in the context today of the movie, it would, I think like choices like that were really, really, really strong, And it was a tricky one to like because basically there's no windows in there, and the only light source is supposed to feel like it's coming from the open door, but Attila, the cousin, is stood in the open door. So then you're like, well, I can't really use that as a light source. And then it was like a really tight. So I had to really cheat the very soft light onto Adrian's character.
Yeah, just cheat the directionality around a little bit to one side.
Basically put it.
Yeah,
we were lucky in again, it was a real location, so it couldn't fly walls or anything. It was just like it was very much like a cell, like imagine like a prison cell, without a window in it. And there was a little cavity just above us in the door, and we'd managed to just put a light similar to this or something, like an LED, soft LED source, and then we could just work with that,
Yeah. I wanted to switch gears to ask a little more about your collaboration with Brady. And we were thinking, like, like Todd Field coming to directing after acting for Kubrick. Brady has done a similar thing, working for these visionaries like, Von Trier, Araki, Haneke.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how he had, he's had these formative experiences with those auteurs and now as a director himself. Yeah. How do you think that informs your collaboration with him and what you guys do together?
It's an interesting one, and not many people ask me that, really. So it's nice to be asked that. I mean, I suppose fundamental to all of it is that Brady had been exposed to a lot of very, very accomplished, intelligent adult cinema from a very early age, So, I mean, I've known Brady since 2015 or something. And, so he was a young guy, he's still a young guy, and he was a younger guy then. So it's like to have someone that assured at that point, I imagine that Brady was saying intelligent stuff about film when he was 12 years old, A 14-year-old filmmaker called me from Chicago the other day to tell me how much, he sent me an email and then I just said, give me a call. And then we spoke. Oh my goodness. I was so touched by it. And I told Brady straight away because it just reminded me of how I imagine he would have been, And he was like, I want to shoot VistaVision for my next film. And I was like 14 years old and he's like, wanted to shoot VistaVision. I was like, all right, fair enough.
Hell yeah.
Anyway, I digress. But I kind of think that fundamental to everything that you're asking is knowledge of cinema, very good taste, although everyone thinks they have good taste, don't they? But I think he genuinely has good taste. We have a shared taste. Always taking it very, very seriously, but he's a very kind person. And he's a very pragmatic person, and he's a very generous person. And he's a great collaborator. But I think he spent so much time on sets working with these people, seeing them work a certain way. I think it's about rigor as well. He's a very rigorous filmmaker, and I regard myself as rigorous as well. And I'm rigorous on the material, I'm rigorous on myself, I'm rigorous on my crew, deeply respectful and appreciative, but I'm rigorous, and I know what I want, and he knows what he wants. And listen, trying to do a movie like this in 33 days for this budget, there's no room for, we have a lovely time, but there's not a lot of room for not just getting on with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's I'm sure those filmmakers. I mean, he became friends with, and I mean, they've definitely. I'm sure he'll obviously have seen the way they work on set and those kind of things. But I think even prior to that, he just had the making. He just had the makings of it, from what I can see. Like, I've never worked with I've worked with first-time directors, but he was unusually assured, even to the point of, like, if he didn't know, he would say, and that's assurance in itself. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's if you don't know what you're doing, the tendency is to kind of like bluff it a little bit. But it's interesting. It's like, when people say, "Oh, I don't know, what do you think?" Da, da, da. Of course they know, but they have the confidence to say they don't.
Yeah. I think what was really exciting to me about the movie is that, the first half reminded me kind of like the 70s cinema, or like Heaven's Gate. There was there was a vastness to it. There's like use of zooms in it. There was kind of maybe kind of a more of a grandiose operatic use of the camera, and then there was also kind of maybe a more modern 21st century handheld, and then there also was just huge risks taken in terms of like where it went to. Maybe not to ruin the film for the audience if they haven't seen it yet, but I think the ending too, like, I actually can't think of any film that uses Betacam in that way.
Right.
And I guess there's usually a few movies every year where I'm just like, cinema is like so vital and it's so exciting, and I was like, I saw this and I was like, God, that's so good. There's still people doing really cool things with movies. Because if it was all like in kind of the 70s, and it's like, well, that's like The Godfather. It's like a great movie, but then it's like, wow, they really like The Godfather. This was like, it was new. It was like fresh, and there was traditional aspects of it that was, and I just, I don't know, I love that you guys were able to do that. I guess that's all I'm saying.
No, thank you. No, I mean, I do think that It's interesting because the older you get, the more conservative you can tend to get as well. And I think, talking myself, as a 50-year-old cinematographer, like there is a tendency you could easily fall into a camp of being like, oh no, it has to be this format, or I only, you know what I mean? Like Anthony Dodmantle, this year, I was on a masterclass with him in 2005 before I shot a film, and I loved his work. I love Julian Donkey Boy, I love Feston. One of the things I've always really loved about his work is that he's choosing the format that serves the story. He's not choosing the format that serves him as a cinematographer. Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense. And it's like he would have, so I love the idea. And it was at a certain time when he was shooting the movies like that, where it wasn't even really digital. It was kind of like video, it was like sort of mini DV and formats like that. They weren't trying to emulate 35mm. As much as I love Sony Venice and the Alexa, they've all tried to emulate 35. So in a way, it's kind of like we have this wonderful kind of like, oh, we can shoot from this to 65 to, and then in a way our palette becomes reduced down if then the digital cameras all try to emulate 35mm or whatever, So I don't know. I mean, maybe it also wouldn't stand up now. Like maybe if I went, be interesting to see like, the new 28 years later, I think like,
right.
Because 28 Days Later was again that, I think Anthony was DP on that, right? So that format was very much of a time, but I want to feel that it all still stands up, like Julian Donkey Boy, and like it's just a beautiful aesthetic where, the highlights just behave there in a certain way and they're not trying to emulate any other format, And I find that kind of like all of that stuff, my point is that it's like, 100 odd years of filmmaking. Sometimes it's surprising how far we haven't come in terms of like still being a little conservative or a little stuck in our ways with certain things, or, like putting slates on or whatever it might be. I remember like, working with non-actors on short films, it was like, we had whole discussions about how do we ident, you cast a non-actor, right? And then you cast them for being them, like in the same way that the Dardenne brothers did, right? And then you go, and then they're like, oh, and suddenly you're like forcing the trappings of film on, which is ludicrous because that's not what it's about. You junk the slates, like no one's watching the slates. So why don't you just get them out of the equation, So we used to do things like just have them over here or tail slate or so, or never say action or whatever. Like you just do something that didn't make, that just made it felt much more naturalistic. I mean, nothing radical about that, but many other filmmakers do it. But I just think it's a film that I think really, 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 and a filmmaker that really seeks to push the form was like Zone of Interest, for example. Because I was just like, there was almost kind of this desire as the director, almost felt kind of free of ego in the sense that like, you're extracting the director from it and you're putting them in a different place, and then that's really important because you are serving the film, and I was like, I loved it. I thought the film was an extraordinary film, but even if it hadn't quite worked for me, the very fact that they were seeking to do something with the form that was different, I was 100% behind,
Yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking exactly about what the ego has to do with maybe some of those choices that you make as a DP or as a director, because I think that you can get bound by the conventions or the like your crew, they want you to do it this way.
They want you to do it this way, or they want to be used, which is fine.
Yeah.
They're like, so you have a fantastic grip and then you do 2 days of handheld and they're like, but it's like, well, listen, I'm sorry, that's what the scene calls for, So it's like, but it's, and I completely get it because everyone wants to be just involved in doing their thing. But it's in the, you have to serve the film, and it's like, there's no point swinging cranes around just like, hey, wasn't that an amazing shot? And then you're like, yeah, sure. It's like, okay, And I did learn early on, I think, with Ballast, that when you're booked as a DP, it's knowing when to do nothing. That's also what you're employed for. You're not employed to always turn up with the truck and get everything off and do this because they've been paid for. And it's like, listen, keep it on the truck. If it doesn't, if it's not improving the scene, then do that, and it's like, you have to have a confidence to kind of remember that, and be like, sometimes, your job is to not impose too much,
Yeah.
It's not about you and your lighting, it's about what's appropriate for the scene.
What are you up to for the rest of your Camerimage?
I'm drunk. Very, very, very drunk.
Good,
I'm definitely going to enjoy drinking. I turned up last night and I said, I have a wonderful AC, Derek Peters, who's now a DP, an operator in his own right, and I've known him for such a long time. And I was like, I'll have a nightcap with you, and then 5 o'clock this morning I roll into bed and I'm like, but you tell you what it felt like last night? It felt like the last scene of It's a Wonderful Life, where suddenly everyone's in the room. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I hadn't seen people I've lived in LA for 5 years.
Right,
and I was like,
outside.
oh my God.
Yeah.
Not that they were all there for me. It wasn't that like I was James Stewart. But it was just like the celebration and the cold and the bar.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God. There was there was Catherine Brown who, she pulled focus for me on a show, my first ever TV show I did called The Crimson Petal and the White. Did an amazing job. Haven't seen her in such a long time. And just people being such a wonderful community, like filmmaking in general, but also this festival. We really embrace each other. Like work-wise, we have to as well, because we could be on a shoot tomorrow and you're just like, well, I don't know who that person is. And then it's like a traveling load of circus troupe. Like we have to get on and make it work, and all that sort of stuff. So I think in our hearts is this desire for us all to be, celebrate each other and to being, and hopefully things like diversity and inclusivity is going to just get better and better, and it's up to, it realizes it's very much up to us to change it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm 50, I'm doing well as a cinematographer, I'm in a position to employ people. If I'm not doing it, who else is? You know what I mean? It's like, that's the only way. The only way to do it is, or one of the only, is to make that concerted effort to make things more diverse in that way, And so I think, that's probably like a, good. I mean, and we have the spirit and the energy and the love to do that. I think we just need to, get better at it.
Yeah. I have a question. I've been dying to ask someone who might know. So I saw Ballast in high school. I think.
I might know then. You might have found the right person. Depends what the question.
I Blockbuster Video is going out of business, and they were just giving away DVDs basically. It was like $1 or something. And I got Ballast on DVD.
We were in the bargain bin, that's what you're saying.
Everyone was at that point. Everyone was in the bargain bin. Yeah. And I was like, what is this movie? And I just kind of bought it on a whim because I liked the cover. And I mean, I think I saw that probably a couple years after it came out, maybe 2010,
that'll be
29.
It came out
2009, yeah. And I've known about your work ever since then. And that film is so freaking good. And I've always wondered, what is Lance Hammer doing? Because I love that movie. I've always wanted to know. I was like, does anyone know what he's doing? Because I think he's a very talented director,
Yeah, he's we haven't seen the last of Lance Hammer.
Okay.
That I can assure you.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No. And he's remained a very, very dear friend. Very dear friend. I see him a lot.
Is he in the States? He's American?
Lives in LA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm in LA now as well, so I've for the last 5 years, so I see him.
Does he do commercials, or is he okay?
No.
Yeah.
I don't think he would be adverse to doing them, but he doesn't do them.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. No, he started out as an architect, in fact. He studied architecture. Yeah, and then he was in art, working as an art director within that department on film.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing when I first got the call because it was my first film, and so I was living in this place called Whitley Bay in the northeast of England, outside of Newcastle. And it's a kind of kind of fairly sleepy coastal town, you know. And I'd had short films that were playing in Berlin. I'd just got an agent, I think. And then about 11 o'clock at night, I got this call, and it was this Lance, you know. And he was like, I have a script, my first feature, available light, non-actors, Mississippi Delta, 35 minutes. And I was like, I'll take 2 of them. Yeah. But it was like 5 of them. I was like, and I stayed up till 3 a.m, just like, just read it. I just read it, and I was just like, I have to do this film. I have to do this film.
Yeah.
And I did not come back until that film was done. Like there was, you know, it was the budget wasn't big at all, and it was, you know, and it was, and also I wasn't as assured, you know, I was assured enough to fight for it and do it, but also when I was getting in trouble exposure-wise and stuff like that, or it's like the fear of, it was awful. It was like the most, like a real punch in the gut, you know, when you know, and also we were watching stuff on like mini DV dailies, like
the telecine of the,
like, we were like looking at them in like this hotel lobby that had barely been blacked out or whatever, and so like I was like, oh God, I was like nothing, and then what I could see was like out of focus, and I was like, oh, it was like,
nightmare feeling.
It was pouring with rain, and I went outside and just started chain smoking. And I was just like, I'm on a plane home. And I was just like, you know, and then cut to, cinematography award. I'm like,
Sundance, right?
Yeah,
it played at Sundance.
That's the weird thing. It's like, at the time, you're like, this is awful.
Yeah. That makes me want to watch, like, if Les Blank made a movie about the making of Ballast, I would want to watch that scene.
No, it was awful. I was completely convinced I was going to be sent home. Completely, 100%. I would have put money on it. I was just like, it was, it's so tricky. It's so tricky because it's like you're going, okay, take all your time and money, everything, all your time and money. I got this. Oh, I don't got this. And you're like, you know what I mean? And you're like, like, especially on that budget, and where you have no. You're like, this is my shot.
That feeling.
It's supposed to be. It didn't work. You know, am I supposed to be an American? Oh no, don't talk about it. It would have been really like tail between my legs. It would have been like, you know, because I was like, I'm off to America to shoot this, and then I was like, if it had all gone wrong, it would have been.
If only you had known then that many years later the Brutalist would be out and you'd be so trusted and celebrated and not fired and all of that.
I know, it's extraordinary. But then still very fearful of like getting that neg report that says, you know, I think, but it keeps you sharp.
That's yours, yeah.
You know. You shouldn't be blasé or, you know, about anything really.
Yeah, fear can bolster rigor.
Yeah, and it's, I think that's the danger when you take your eye off the ball is when things do go wrong, you know. It's like you become a little complacent or a little cocky, as they'd say in England. You know.
So what you're saying is you're not ready to go to sitcoms.
Yeah.
Not unless they want them very dark. And all shot
Brady
in one camera, one shot.
Ooh, there we go.
Underexposed, one shot, push process.
One season, one shot.
We're not quite at that point.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a wonderful conversation.
Okay, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. I really did.
Yeah, this was such a ride today. I feel like we've been with you all day. We saw the movie.
And then the first
Q&A. You lucky thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely.
This episode was produced by Peter Pascucci, Ava Benjamin Shorr, David Kruta, Topher Hammond, and with original music by Out of Flux. We would like to extend our thanks to the Cinematography Salon community for supporting our efforts with this show. If you like what we're doing, please consider chipping in at patreon.com/cinematography salon. Every little bit helps. Once again, we would like to express our gratitude to our friends at Fujifilm, Cream Source, SanDisk, and Condor Blue for making these special edition episodes a reality. As always, please follow us on social media at Cinematography Salon on Instagram, or visit us at cinematographysalon.com. There you can sign up for our email list to stay up to date with all of our latest efforts, including additional podcast episodes, in-person events, and more. Season 3 of the podcast is coming soon, so stay tuned and we will see you next time. Thank you.